And just like that, we're already to round number 8. The Motocross series is heading back west to Washougal. This track is a bit different than the rest of the tracks on the series. The dirt's a lot harder, there's shadows, and the weather's going to be nice and cool as well. So it is a nice little change of pace. And this is our race day update show where we go over the rider statistics, rider storylines, points, injury updates. Pretty much I do my best to give you guys everything that you might need to know before the gate drops. Alright, so the first thing we're going to get into is our injury updates. Unfortunately, this list is getting pretty extensive, but the good news is we are heading into a 2-week break after this weekend. So I do expect to have a lot of people returning at the next round in Ironman. Starting out in the 250 class, we still have the same 5-star Yamaha riders that are out. Starting off with Max Anstey, he's just starting to get back on the bike. He's coming up on 8 weeks post-surgery on his leg. It's been months since he broke it, but originally they thought he wouldn't need surgery. It sounds like he's just riding turn tracks and looking to progress to a regular track this following week. So maybe if that goes really well, we could see him at Ironman or one of the later rounds in motocross. Daxton Bennick has been back on the bike for a while now. He's working his way back from those concussions that he had in Supercross. Not quite sure when he'll be back, but I do expect him to race some motocross this season. Pierce Brown is back on the bike and looking good as well. Pretty surprising to me after that scary back injury that he had that he's able to get back on the bike and riding so quickly. It sounds like he's expecting to return at some point as well. Cole Davies has been back on the bike for a couple weeks now, but it's not quite clear exactly when his return date is either. Personally, I wouldn't be surprised to see any or potentially all of these guys return after the break. Caden Manier is recovering from that UCL surgery that he had. He should be able to get back on the bike around Unadilla. Whether or not that means he'll be lining up at that time, I don't know. I doubt that he'll immediately jump back into racing, but he should be able to stay in relatively good shape, given that it's just his thumb that was affected. So I'm sure he's still cycling and things like that. But given his age, there's no real reason for him to try to rush back into the series. So I don't expect that we'll see him again until Supercross. Then we have the entire Red Bull KTM team also out. Julien Beaumer banged up his wrist and was just not doing very good after his crash in High Point. Sounds like he's going to be sitting out at least through the break. And now Tom Vial crashed last weekend at Millville. Sounds like he's having knee and shoulder issues, so he's going to be sitting out this weekend. He's hoping to heal up over the break and come back as well. I'm curious to see how it goes when he does come back. It sounds like the team offered him a 1-year deal to come back and race for them next year in the 450 class. But right now the rumor is that it sounds like he's leaning on going to Europe and racing for Honda. Next we have the Pro Circuit guys. Ty Masterpool is going to be out after having a practice crash and breaking his hand. It sounds like he's doing his best to come back after the break. Seth Hammaker started off having a pretty good weekend at Millville. Then, unfortunately, he ended up going down in the second moto, and it sounds like he tweaked his knee. He's been able to be pretty consistent throughout the Supercross season, but that consistency has unfortunately not carried into the motocross season so far. He's had a lot of crashes and tip-overs. The good news is he is going to line up this weekend. Hopefully he can get things going and stay off the ground. And then we have his teammate Cameron McAdoo, who is still recovering from that ACL reconstruction. We also have Chance Hymas, who just had his ACL reconstructed, as well as Gavin Towers, who will miss the rest of the 2025 season with his ACL reconstruction. Casey Cochran is out for the rest of motocross after having shoulder surgery. Styles Robertson has all kinds of concerns with his wrist. Evan Ferry is going to miss the entire season with his Achilles tear. Carson Mumford is still out with his ankle injury. And then Nick Romano went down at Fox Raceway and injured his shoulder. He sounds like he's still trying to come back for the last few rounds of motocross, but not quite sure exactly if he'll be able to do that. And then we have the absolute trooper of Jalek Swoll, who's been apparently riding with a torn UCL. We've been seeing this injury pop up a lot more in recent years. This is the same injury that Caden Manier just had surgery to repair. Sounds like Jalek Swoll is going to plan on riding through it. He's been doing that and getting pretty good results. He already missed the majority of this season with his Achilles tear, and it sounds like he was not willing to go in and get surgery and miss the rest of the season. He's not really able to ride during the week, he's just making the most of it, so shout out to Jalek Swoll. And then one last shout out in the 250 class, we got to give a shout out to Trevor Collip. He had that gnarly femur injury, which ended up leading to strokes and all kinds of gnarly stuff like that. He's doing better, he's back up on his feet, so we wish you all the best on your recovery process. And it's great to see that things are at least looking a little bit better. Moving on to the 450 class, Jason Anderson is now out for the remainder of the season, including SMX. So he's essentially done riding for Kawasaki now. It's going to be pretty interesting to see what happens here, but unfortunately we're not going to see Jason Anderson again this year. Aaron Plessinger is also going to be out this weekend. He's doing his best to figure out what kind of illness he's dealing with. He's really struggled the last couple of rounds of motocross and not been able to finish the races. Joey Savacci is still out after being run over at Redbud. Not really sure exactly what type of injury he has other than it being a leg injury. Up until that point, he's been really solid so far this season, so hopefully he can at least come back for SMX. Cooper Webb is out for the remainder of the motocross season after what sounds like a meniscus tear. Dylan Ferrandis is still battling his stress fractures in his leg. Not sure if he'll return for motocross or not, but if he does, it'll probably just be the last couple of rounds. Grant Harlan also got his leg ran over at Redbud. He's still recovering from that. And then Derek Kelly also injured his leg at Redbud. He broke his fibula, so he's definitely going to be out for the foreseeable future. And then I want to end on kind of a positive note. Freddie Noren is returning to the series from being a little bit banged up. He did leave his team. He's been on that ISRT MX for Christ Kawasaki team for a few years now and had some really good results at times. Not really sure exactly what happened there, but he's going to be racing on a Yamaha this weekend. Moving on to our 250 class points and storylines, at the top, of course, we have Hayden Deegan. He was able to go out there and grit it out last weekend and bring home another win. At this point, I would not be surprised if he's able to go out there and win the remainder of the overalls this season. I'm sure his leg is feeling a little bit better this weekend, and we've also seen him do really good here in the past. He did win here last year, and this is also where we saw him have that breakout ride against Hunter Lawrence when he was in his title year. So unless he gets a really bad start or goes down in one of the motos, I do expect him to have a pretty good weekend. And then 45 points behind Hayden, we have Joe Shimoda, who is just clinging on to some sort of hope of being in the championship fight. That being said, it's great to have Joe out there. He's looking really good. It sounds like he is going to stick with Honda next year, which is great news if you're Garrett Marchbanks. There was some speculation for a while there that Joe could be heading back to Pro Circuit, which could put Marchbanks' job on the line. Anyways, Joe's out there looking good. I'm excited to see what he can do. He did finish on the podium here last year while riding for Honda. Hopefully he can start in front of Hayden this weekend and make things interesting. 62 points behind Joe Shimoda, we have the third place rider in the championship, Levi Kitchen, and this is Levi's home race. We have seen him struggle here a bit in the past. He didn't do too bad here last year. He finished 6th overall, but that performance definitely didn't match the results he was putting in at that time. He did okay in Moto 2, where he started around 5th and finished in 4th, but he got a pretty bad start in Moto 1 and that really hurt him. He does seem to be coming around so far this season. That was until Moto number 1 last weekend, where he finished in 13th. He had a nice little string of podiums going there, and then it kind of all came undone at Millville. So I'm curious to see if he can turn things around and get momentum back going in his direction this weekend at his hometown race. History would indicate that he probably won't, but it'd be really cool to see if he did. Then actually tied with Kitchen right now is Garrett Marchbanks. I'm not quite sure what to expect out of him this weekend. I feel like this particular track could end up suiting his style. That being said, we did not get to see him race here last year. He was in that kind of a weird limbo in between when he left Club MX and got on Pro Circuit at this time, so he did not race. That being said, he did quietly get a top 5 overall finish last weekend. He's been rock solid. That's why he's tied right here for 3rd in the championship. 5th in the championship is where we have Tom Vial right now. He's probably going to lose that to the 6th place rider. It sounds like he's pretty banged up, but if you were going to get banged up, now is probably the best time to do it, because you're going to have about 3 weeks to recover by the time you come back. So in 6th, 20 points behind Tom Vial, is Mikkel Harep. I'm pretty excited from what we've been seeing out of Mikkel lately. He actually got a Moto podium in Moto 2 last weekend and just missed the overall podium. He's been riding really well, starting pretty good, and he's going to be cracking into the top 5 in the points pretty quickly here. 12 points behind Harep, we have Michael Moseman, and he actually was able to grab a top 5 in Moto number 1, and then he had some issues in Moto 2. That's kind of been the story of his season so far. He's had a lot of good motos, not a lot of good races where he's able to put together 2 really solid finishes, but when he is able to get those finishes, he's right there in the top 5 overall. And he's actually had a really solid season in general. He's actually in the top 5 in the SMX seeding right now, and depending on how much Tom Vial misses, he could actually get into 4th. In 8th, 29 points behind Moseman, we have Max Foland. He ended up going 10-17 for 13th overall last weekend. That 17th in Moto2 definitely hurt him a little bit, but he still leaps and bounds ahead of every other non-factory rider in this field. At least as far as the championship is concerned. We've seen Dylan Schwartz as well as Parker Ross have some really good rides, but they're way further back in the points. In 9th is where we find Chance Hymas, but he's not racing for the rest of the season. Rounding out your top 10, 13 points behind Boland, we have Jordan Smith. And it's interesting to see how the dynamic has changed throughout this season. Jordan Smith was actually kind of keeping pace with Mikkel Harup earlier in the season. I had made the prediction that Mikkel would be the top Triumph rider in the motocross season, and Jordan had me a little bit nervous there at the beginning because they were essentially duking it out in the points. He's still right here in the top 10, but he was actually the worst place finishing Triumph rider last weekend at Millville. Thankfully, he was able to grab an 8th place finish in Moto number 2, which got him a 10th overall, and that actually saw all 4 Triumph riders finishing inside the top 10. So Jordan's still riding pretty good. He's top 10 in the championship. He's never been that great at motocross, but now that Mikkel's coming to life, Swole's riding good, and we had an Austin Faulkner sighting last weekend, Jordan Smith is essentially at the bottom of the totem pole right now. 6 points behind Jordan is where we find Seth Hamaker, and he is going to be back racing this weekend, but he's also banged up. Another 9 points back is where we find Dylan Schwartz. And I don't know if anybody realizes this, but Dylan Schwartz quietly got 7th overall last weekend right behind Levi Kitchen. It's not like he had any incredibly good rides, but he was definitely solid, and he's been really fast all throughout the season. We saw him have a fast qualifying time at Redbud, so he has the speed at times, he just lacks the consistency. We've seen him get some really good results here at Washougal in the past, so I'm curious to see if we see anything like that. If he does manage to get a really good start, he could be a contender for a top 5 moto finish. In 13th and 14th is where we find Julian Beaumer as well as Ty Masterpool. They're both going to be out. So rounding out your top 15, another 10 points behind Schwartz is where we find Jalek Swole. And the fact that he's racing with a torn UCL, it is understandable, but it's also pretty remarkable. We saw Cooper Webb do something similar in Supercross earlier this year, but this is motocross. He's out there for 30+2 twice in one weekend, and he's getting results while doing it. He did have a rough Moto1 last weekend where he finished in 16th, but then he bounced back with a top 5 finish in Moto number 2 to get him up into the top 10 as far as an overall finish. In 16th, tied with Jalek, we have Ryder DeFrancisco. And Redbud was great for him. He was fastest qualifier in both sessions. He was able to run up front, and now we're right back to being concerned. The best he was able to do last weekend was a 15th in Moto number 2, and he finished 18th overall. And that's kind of how his season's gone. He's had speed at times, but his moto finishes have been pretty poor. I'm really not sure what to make of this because we've seen him have a lot of success in the past, and I want all the best for him, but at this point it's looking a little shaky. The good news is, with the points that he scored last weekend, he did finally gain enough points to pass Colin Park and crack into the top 20 overall in SMX. So as long as things keep going the way they are, he should be able to go directly into the playoff main events. Another 10 points back in 17th, we have Parker Ross. And Parker Ross has been looking really good when he's on. He was another guy who struggled in Moto 1, but then he bounced back with a 10th place finish in Moto 2. So he is starting to back up his performances. He's starting to be pretty consistent. And he's actually tied with Austin Faulkner right now in SMX seeding. Another 5 points back is where we find Casey Cochran. And the unfortunate part about Casey being out for the remainder of motocross is that he could be in jeopardy of dropping outside of the top 30 and not being able to technically compete in the playoffs. That being said, usually not all 10 of the 21 to 30 place guys in the seeding all compete, and there's usually a few more guys that are allowed in. So I'm sure if he wants to, he will be able to compete in the playoffs, but he's definitely in a bit of a rough spot. Just behind Casey in 19th is Drew Adams, and he's only a few points away from passing Colin Park and finally cracking into the top 20 overall in SMX seeding. The only problem with that is that he has Lux Turner, Dylan Schwartz, and Jalek Swole all breathing down his neck because they all want to get inside that top 20 as well. So keep your eye on that Ryder D, Drew Adams, Lux Turner, Dylan Schwartz, and Jalek Swole dynamic, because all of those guys are within striking distance of being in the top 20, and there's really only 2 spots up for grabs. Another 2 points back is where we find Nate Thrasher. I'm really not sure what to say about Nate Thrasher right now. He finished 19th overall last weekend. He's been really struggling the last few rounds of motocross. We've never seen him really kill it in motocross like he does in supercross sometimes, but we have seen him at least contend for top fives and things like that, and he is way off of that pace. Even if he is banged up, I was expecting a little bit more, kind of like Ryder DeFrancisco. Luckily, from his supercross season, he is all the way up into 12th in SMX seeding, so he should be fine there. If he can just regroup and try to get some momentum going before SMX, he could probably contend for a top 10 there. And then another 10 points back is where we find Austin Faulkner. And man, it was so cool to see Austin finally show up. We've seen him win motocross overalls before. We've seen him do pretty good even in 2023 when he rushed back from that injury. He did get a few pretty good results as he tried to get his way into SMX that year. Nothing to raise eyebrows, but still way better than what we've been seeing this year. And now we finally got our first glimpse of that. It's just reassuring to know that Austin is capable and that he does want to go out there and get it done. We saw the speed in qualifying and he backed it up with an 8th place overall finish. More importantly, he is staying healthy. He got through the entire Supercross season for the first time in his almost 10-year career. He has made it through a couple of motocross seasons healthy, but it looks like he's well on his way to getting a back-to-back Supercross and motocross season healthy. If he can do that and do well in SMX, maybe that's what he needs to build on into the offseason and come out really swinging for Supercross. At this point, I just don't want to see him hit the ground. He did finally have his baby, so that's out of the way. Maybe that's his dad's strength kicking in. Either way, it was a breath of fresh air. I'm sure it was some weight off of the shoulders of Austin Faulkner. After everything he's been through, I wish him nothing but the best. And then I just quickly want to shout out the next few guys in the championship without going too deep. Behind Austin Faulkner, we have Lux Turner, then Avery Long, and then Alexander Federstoff. They're all looking pretty good. They've had their moments. And then before we move on to the 450s, I also quickly want to mention, it looks like we're going to have Enzo Timmerman back this weekend. We saw him race a couple of rounds at the beginning of this season. He looked pretty good. He was able to score some points, and he is going to be back this weekend. Moving into our 450 class, at the top we have Jet Lawrence, and he is now 51 points ahead of his brother Hunter. So that means he is now more than one race ahead of everybody else in the field. I've been saying it the last few weeks, I'll say it again, I think he'll probably win the rest of the overalls this season, but at least he's nice enough to make it interesting. He's letting some guys get a couple of moto wins here and there. Second in the championship, we have Hunter Lawrence, and he looked really good last weekend. He's really been coming on strong these last few weeks. I'm curious to see how this dynamic continues to develop as Hunter gets closer to being able to get a race win. How much more frustrating is it each time that he does not get it? Right now, the family dynamic still seems really good, really strong, but I'm curious if that starts to fracture at any point as Hunter begins to see himself as somebody who should be winning races. Also, I think it's worth mentioning that Hunter has now made his way around Eli Tomac in the SMX standings, so that could be something to keep an eye on with AP and Cooper Webb both being out. If Chase Sexton doesn't close out the season really strong, Hunter Lawrence could finish as high up as third in the SMX seeding. Third in the championship, 39 points behind Hunter Lawrence, we now have Justin Cooper. Unfortunately, we did see Justin have a pretty rough crash last weekend in practice. Thankfully, he was still able to salvage a top 10 overall, and he got 5th in Moto number 1. I do expect him to bounce back pretty strong and be back in the top 5 this weekend. Fourth in the championship, only 1 point behind J Coop, we have Eli Tomac, and it was good to see Eli back out there doing his thing. But he definitely does not look like himself. He hasn't looked like himself since he lost his bike at Redbud. He was pushing his way forward in that moto up until his bike gave up. And ever since then, it's like when his bike blew, everything else around him blew, and we haven't seen Eli Tomac come back since. Last weekend, Moto 1 wasn't absolutely terrible, but in Moto 2, things got pretty rough. He ended up finishing in 9th, but he wasn't working his way back from a 30th place start. He was already up there, and he was getting passed by guys like Valentin Guillot, who are very good, very capable riders, but are also on a fully stocked privateer Yamaha and should not be passing him and pulling away to a 6th place finish. Now, me personally, I'm not smashing the panic button. I'm going to be keeping my eye on Eli's performance this weekend. He has been very good here in the past. I believe his worst finish ever is a second place. So if he's not able to at least pick his way up through the field and contend for an overall podium this weekend, then I would definitely say it's time to start asking some serious questions. But either way, it's great to have Eli out there, and I'm excited to see what he can do this weekend. Rounding out your top 5 in the championship, 25 points behind Eli, we have RJ Hampshire. And interestingly, RJ has quietly gone from a 6th place guy up to a 4th place guy. When you take out Aaron Plessinger, as well as Cooper Webb, who was one of the guys he was battling with, that kind of makes sense. But we've seen RJ getting 4th overall the last couple weeks in a row now. Last weekend, he went 4-4 right behind Chase Sexton. So this is not a fluke. I'm kind of curious exactly how his wrist is holding up. I know it's got to be at least a little bit unstable now that he's missing some bone in there. But obviously, he's able to get the job done. So great job, RJ. In 6th is where we have Aaron Plessinger. He's obviously going to be out. 47 points behind RJ Hampshire, we have Jorge Prado. It looked like Jorge Prado was finally starting to get the ball rolling in the right direction. He looked really solid at Southwick, and then he led like half of a moto at Redbud. 2 really big improvements 2 weekends in a row. And then the wheels completely fell off in the first moto at Millville. Interestingly, they did make some pretty big bike changes, and he was able to bounce back with a top 5 moto finish at Moto 2. So there does seem to be some truth to the bike setup issues. That being said, I do think he could have scored a lot better than 12th in the first moto if he tried his hardest. He clearly seemed to be laying up, and that's got to be frustrating for the team who's definitely giving it their all. I'm not quite sure what to say about what's going on over there at Kawasaki with Anderson leaving in the middle of the season and Prado clearly upset as well. I'm really curious to see what happens when Chase Sexton goes over there next year. Anyways, clinging on to 8th in the championship right now is Cooper Webb. He's on his way down the standings. He'll likely go from battling for the number 1 seed to ending up somewhere between the 6th and 8th seed, depending on how things all shake out. So the next closest guy, 40 points behind Prado, we have Malcolm Stewart. And most of you probably don't realize he actually got 6th last weekend. So quite an improvement for Malcolm. He's out there scoring his points, turning his laps, making his sponsors happy. So shout out to Malcolm. Rounding out your top 10, 10 points behind Malcolm, we have Joey Savacci. So shout out to Joey Savacci. He will not be racing this weekend or anytime soon, it doesn't sound like. In 11th, another 11 points behind Savacci, we have Cody Schock. So he will likely be going into your top 10 after this weekend. He had another pretty solid weekend last weekend with 911 moto scores, finishing 11th overall. Right now, he's 22nd in the SMX standings, so he still needs a couple of spots. But both of the beta riders are still in the top 20 and they're not racing, so he should at least overtake them. And he's also not that far behind Mitchell Harrison. So assuming he can keep trending in this direction, he is poised to take over the 19th seed and go directly into the SMX main events. Then only 1 point behind Cody Schock in motocross points, we have Valentin Guillot. He rode really well last weekend and really well in the second moto where he finished in 6th. He ended up getting 28 points on the day, going 10-6 for 8th overall. But interestingly, there was a 3-way tie for 5th place overall, and that was with only 29 points. So had he, say, gotten 5th in moto number 2, believe it or not, that would have leapfrogged him from 8th overall all the way up to 5th overall. Interestingly enough, he did beat every other guy in front of him from 5th, 6th, and 7th in the second moto. And he is starting to work his way up the SMX standings as well. If he continues on this trend, he could get your 20th place seed because right now he's only 9 points behind Cody Schock because remember he did do one 450 Supercross race. But if he keeps earning points at this rate, as long as he can stay ahead of Pat Terrell, he'll likely get your 20th seed and go directly into the SMX mains himself. 13th in the championship, only 1 point behind Guillot is Jason Anderson. But like I said earlier, he's going to be out for the remainder of the season. It's now being rumored that he's signed with HEP Suzuki for 2026. Personally, I thought he was going to go to Ducati. Sounds like that's not going to happen. We all pretty much know Barsha was headed there, and it sounds like they might have got Ferrandis as well. But that is still speculation at this point. Also, it's worth noting that he'll probably lose his spot in SMX seating to RJ Hampshire, which is still going to give Hampshire 1 more point. Nobody else is really going to pass him, I don't think. 14th in the points, 8 points behind Guillot is Benoit Patorel. He actually struggled quite a bit last week, going 1635 for 18th overall, but he has had some really good rides this season. I'm curious to see what that team does in 2026 if they go ahead and retain Colt Nichols and Benoit. I would have to imagine if they do take on Jason Anderson and Ken Roczen next year, that's going to eat up a fair bit of budget. As of the way things look right now, it looks like Benoit might be one of the first guys outside of the top 20 in SMX seating as well, so that's pretty tough. 7 points behind Pat Terrell is Harry Kulas. He's been on a bit of a hot streak lately, at least compared to how his season started. He's been getting some top 10 moto finishes, and I believe he even got a top 10 overall. Last weekend he went 13-14, which still gave him a 13th overall, so not quite as good, but still really solid. Also, it looks like he took home the win at the PIR Thursday night race, which ended up getting him a cool $3,000. So congratulations on that, Harry. I'll try to touch on that race a little bit more if there's time and I can find enough footage of it. Another 16 points back, we have Justin Barcia. And if you guys missed it, Justin Barcia actually sneakily got 5th last weekend. He did bring home a top 5. It was with 8.7 moto scores, so even he was shocked. But shout out to Justin Barcia. He's out there scoring some points. Looks like he's headed to Ducati. Gonna keep the Troy Lee thing rolling into next season. But he's not looking too bad, and as long as he keeps the ball rolling, he's gonna probably be top 10 going into the SMX playoffs as well. Another 6 points back. In 17th is where we find Chase Sexton. And he went 3-3 for 3rd overall last weekend. He's definitely the 3rd best guy right now. Can't quite seem to keep up with the Lawrences. But then again, I'm not sure how much he's really trying. If he had a toe or was in front of them, I'm sure he would put up a little bit more of a fight. But he knows those guys are locked in, feeling comfortable, and he doesn't want to go down and ruin himself right when he just returned to the series. Right now, he's still 30 points ahead of Jet in SMX seeding, so if he can actually lock in and get a lot of second place moto finishes behind Jet, or maybe beat Jet in one of these motos, or something like that, he could actually bring home the number 2 seed behind Justin Cooper, but more than likely, he'll probably bring home the number 3 seed. Looks like it's probably going to go Cooper, Jet, and then Chase Sexton, and then Hunter Lawrence. Maybe Hunter can get around him too. I don't think he really cares that much between 2nd, 3rd, or 4th seeding, but I just thought it was worth mentioning. And then if we drop another 8 points back, that's where we find Colt Nichols. He did bring home a respectable 14th place overall last weekend. He's definitely been struggling these last few weeks. At least he did a little bit better. He was consistent in both motos last weekend. A step in the right direction. The field is pretty deep, and he's out there scoring points. He was finally able to leapfrog the cluster of guys from Supercross, which was Dylan Ferrandis, Justin Hill, and Shane McElrath. So he just got a huge boost in the SMX standings. Looks like Jorge Prado is probably going to chase him down and take over that 14th seed. But nonetheless, he has worked his way up the standings quite a bit. So he is pretty much locked in to the main event of the playoffs at this point. In 19th, another 8 points back is Lorenzo Locurcio. And before you just kind of move on and feel like he's irrelevant, we got to look at what he did last weekend. He almost scored a top 10 in both motos. He went 11-12 for 12th overall. Really solid rides. This guy is managing a team and racing in the premier class, all while almost getting top 10s. So while I just said Colt Nichols was pretty solid for getting a 14th overall, this guy was beating him by a significant amount, and not with decent resources from a team. He is the team. He's managing a team. He's running the team, and he's out there tearing it up. So shout out to Lorenzo Locurcio. He is the guy behind the Wildcat Gas team. Rounding out your top 20 in the championship, we have Mitchell Harrison. Right now, he's actually tied with Locurcio in points, but he did score quite a few points in Supercross, and he didn't do nearly as well as Locurcio last weekend, but he did still score 10 points, so he's out there getting a reasonable amount of points. Right now, he's barely clinging on to 21st in the SMX seeding, right in front of Cody Schock. He's only a couple of points behind both of the beta riders, so as long as he can replicate that performance this week, I would expect him to leapfrog past both of them, but then he'll probably also be passed by at least Cody Schock, so he would go from 21st all the way up to 19th, but then back down to 20th when Cody Schock passes him. He's right there on that bubble. I'm sure he's feeling the pressure because you know he's not going to want to go to the LCQ. Realistically, if he wants to be in the top 20, he's going to have to hold off Guillaume and Paturel, and he only has a 12-point lead over those guys. And just last weekend, Guillaume did score another 18 points more than him, so that's going to be a very tall task, but something that I'm sure he's going to be trying to do nonetheless. As we move outside of the top 20, we have a lot of guys who are no longer in the series, but I think it's still worth talking about, giving a shout out. In 21st, we have Grant Harlan. He's been plagued with injuries so far this season. Romain Pop has had a few good races. He's right there in 22nd. Then in 23rd, we have Derek Kelly. He's out with a broken leg. 24th, Tony Cairoli. He came over here, did a couple races for Ducati. He did say he wants to keep racing, maybe even try to get into the SMX LCQ. Looks like that didn't work out, at least not for this round. He didn't rule it out in the future as we return from the break. And then in 25th, we have Derek Drake. He's had speed at times. He's been out the last couple of rounds. And then in 26th, we have Freddie Noren, who is returning this weekend on the Yamaha. Moving on to some rider statistics, whether you're betting or playing fantasy or just like to know what's going on, this segment is for you. So a couple of 250 class notes before we jump into the 450s. With Tom Vial now being out of the series, other than Hayden Deegan, Austin Faulkner is the only active rider in the class to have a moto win here at Washougal, and based off of the performance that we saw to him last weekend, I just thought that was worth noting. Not saying he's going to go out there and win, but hopefully he continues his momentum. Also, I thought it was worth mentioning that Hayden Deegan is undefeated here at Washougal. He's only ever lost one moto, never lost an overall. If he manages to win the overall today, he will tie James Stewart as the only rider to get 3 250 class wins at Washougal in a row. Also, you'll hear quite a lot this weekend that Levi Kitchen tends to struggle at his home track here at Washougal, but it's a little bit deeper than that. He tends to struggle in the first moto. He averages a finish of 10th in moto number 1, and that average drops all the way down to 3.5 in moto 2. So he's actually finished near the top 5 overall in most of his starts, but it's almost like those home race jitters really have him off to a rough start to the day, and then he's able to overcome that as he gets in his groove. So I'm curious to see how that plays out today as well. Anyways, jumping into the meat of the statistics, the first guy we're going to talk about is Jet Lawrence, and there's not much that I need to say here to try to convince you that he's probably going to win today, but if he can get your fastest qualifier, that would actually tie him for 3rd overall all time with Ryan Dungey, who had 19 pole positions. Also, through the 7 rounds that we've raced so far, Jet already has 6 hole shots, which is the most that anybody got last year, so he's consistently starting towards the front of the pack. Almost 50% of the time he gets the hole shot. As far as his brother Hunter Lawrence goes, he's actually struggled a bit here. If you guys remember Hayden Deegan's rookie season, this is where we saw him break out and go 1-1 against Hunter, who was otherwise dominant against Hayden that year. Also in his rookie 450 season, Hunter was on an absolute tear of consistently being on the podium up until Washougal, which was the first race that he was not on the podium. He still managed a top 5, so I don't expect him to be bad. He's absolutely killing it right now. I would not be surprised at all if he's still up there contending for moto wins, but just know that he has struggled here in the past. He has slightly underperformed when compared to the rest of his season, but based off of the way things are looking right now, he could probably still get second even if he underperforms. As far as Eli Tomac, like I was saying earlier, if he is going to bounce back, it's going to have to be this race. He's raced here at Washougal 7 times, and he has an average finish of 1.57. He has a total of 3 wins, and in the 4 other attempts, he's finished second. So like I said, he has not ever finished worse than second here. Pretty incredible if you consider the depth of the fields that he's raced throughout his career. He did say in press day that they took a pretty big swing on his bike setup, and it worked really good at the test track, and that did not translate at all at Millville. He's pretty frustrated, and he did not say that they necessarily found a remedy. But keep in mind, Washougal is a lot different than Millville, so I don't want to just assume that he is done. Don't be surprised if he comes out here and gets a podium. But that being said, don't be surprised if he doesn't, because this is actually even better of a track for Chase Sexton, statistically speaking. He's raced here 4 times, and his average finish is 1.25. he has 3 wins and 1 second place, which he got right behind Jet Lawrence during his perfect season in 2023. He has more laps led here than any other track that he's raced at in his 450 career. He's coming off of 2 consistent podium finishes at Millville, so don't be surprised if he ends up coming out and being on the podium once again. As far as Justin Cooper goes, he is still banged up from crashing last weekend. He has been consistently a top 5 guy. Not sure if that's going to translate this weekend. He did get a 3rd place finish here in a moto last year, but he's only able to scrounge up a 5th place overall, and that was with 2 pretty good starts. He was inside the top 3 at both moto starts, but unfortunately he was only able to salvage a 7th place finish in moto number 2 last year, and that's when the field, in my opinion, was not as deep. So keep in mind, we've already talked about 4 pretty solid riders. This is the 5th one. Another rider that I think you might want to consider for your top 5 if you're playing fantasy is RJ Hampshire. He has a couple of 4th place finishes in a row now, and he was able to go 4-4 in the motos last weekend. So even if we assume that Eli Tomac is now back ahead of him, that would still put him with 5-5 scores, finishing well ahead of Justin Cooper. I'm curious to see how he does on this particular track. He did say that his wrist is feeling a lot better. He's not having to tape it up anymore. No more ibuprofen, so that is great to hear. Also, it's a small detail, but still worth mentioning. He has now worked himself into the top 5 in the points. So the fact that he's been in the top 5 at the last 2 races, he's now top 5 in the points. He's starting to see himself as a top 5 guy. So mentally, he's no longer going to be okay with finishing outside of the top 5, something worth noting. And then of course we can mention that Jorge Prado has been in the top 5 at times. This could be a better track for him, being that it's a little bit more hard packed. It's not going to be as hot. I'm not expecting him to be in the top 5, but I definitely think it's possible. And then of course Justin Barcia did manage a top 5 last weekend. Looking at the Rocky Mountain wildcard this week, it is 10th place. So keep in mind, we've already talked about 8 riders. Cooper Webb and Aaron Plessinger are both out of the series. So that would leave Malcolm Stewart and maybe Cody Schock right there at that 9th, 10th place range. But then we just saw a really good ride out of Valentin Guillot. Benoit Paturel and Harry Koulas are also in that same range. But then again, looking at the results last weekend, Justin Cooper actually got 10th place. But that was mainly due to his second moto where he couldn't hold it together anymore. So I do expect him to be closer to at least 7th or 8th in a worst case scenario this weekend. So let's just assume, based off of what we've seen so far this season, we have Jet, Hunter, Chase, Eli, RJ, Justin Cooper, Jorge Prado, and Justin Barcia all kind of locked into that top 8 unless something extreme happens. Then I think it's fair to say that you'd have Malcolm Stewart and Cody Schock likely battling it out for that 9th and 10th place spot. So assuming that somebody has a bad moto or makes a mistake somewhere along the lines, then maybe that would allow Guillot or Koulas to get back up in there, or maybe even Lucorcio. Probably not. I don't think that's going to happen. So realistically, I think you probably need to look at Schock or Guillot. But if you have a hunch about somebody else, I would go for that. Next, I just want to mention its military appreciation race. So we've seen this in Supercross for years. Usually it's San Diego, but it's cool to see Pro Motocross adapting this. I've seen quite a few videos of the different bikes, so I just wanted to kind of highlight some of these. Some are cooler than others, but it's always cool to see the teams doing a military appreciation scheme. Got some pretty cool stuff here with the Partzilla team. Definitely went all out right there. Definitely digging the club bikes. These things look super cool. Got like a digital camo blue thing going on. Star definitely did a good job here. You see they did kind of a blue and gray camo. 450s are looking sick. So I just wanted to highlight some of these really quick. And then we have one other thing to get into before the end of the show. All right, next we gotta talk about this hole shot challenge. If you guys don't know what that was, it was a little thing that was going on between Jason Thomas and Steve Matthes. Essentially, Steve thinks that the factory HRC start maps are so good that a guy like him could hole shot just about anybody. So JT, being a former pro racer, agreed to hop on a stock Honda and go against Matthes, who was going to be on Hunter Lawrence's bike. They were going to do 3 practice starts and then do a best 3 out of 5 hole shot challenge. So if you guys didn't see that already, they did it on Friday. After press day, it was pretty wild. Hunter Lawrence just cruised over on his bike. He's like, here you go, Steve, here's the bike. Good luck. You have the entire amateur day just sitting behind the gate watching these guys do start practice. JT almost loops it on one of the start practices, goes shooting off to the right. Everything gets sorted out. They go up. First one, they both get a pretty good jump, but JT ends up bringing it home. Second one, they switch sides. Same thing could be said. JT gets a good jump, takes it home. Matthes isn't even going to the hole shot line. Third one, Hunter and Jet both get in Mathes's ear. They're like, dude, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. Dump the clutch, hold it wide open, don't give up until the line. And sure enough, it was quite an improvement, much better run out of Matthes, but unfortunately, it was not good enough. So JT ended up going 3-0, bringing home the red plate. He had a nice little ceremony with Mike Pelletier from the AMA, where he received the plate. He had some nice things to say, so I'll let him speak for himself.
JT, congratulations on winning the Hole Shot Challenge.
Thank you, Mike. It's an honor. I'm usually the one handing these out with Mike there. Honestly, this was a lot of fun. I don't take any, pride in winning this. I'm just happy to do it.
Steve, Mike has real work to do now.
Well, Steve got a lot better. He did, and I give him a lot of credit. And mostly, this was about Honda and the AMA and MX Sports and Washougal, Ryan Huff, and everybody being super cool and allowing us to do it. We had a lot of fun. Listen, I have no ego in my riding skill, so I didn't have any confidence at all, so I'm not going to have any braggadociousness at the end of it. It was just, honestly, it was a lot of fun. I'm glad we got to do it, because I know if Steve won, he would never, ever, ever let me hear the end of it, so I'm not going to go down that road. I'm not going to do it.
Anyways, I thought that was pretty cool, pretty funny. I can't believe that something like that actually happened. Cool of Honda to let somebody else ride their bike. Cool of Washougal to fit it into their schedule and work with the AMA. I thought it was pretty refreshing to see something like this. Let me know what you guys think. And I did want to find some more PIR Thursday night race where a lot of pros went out there and took a shot at the money. I know Harry Koulas got the win. Brandon Ray came in second, and I think maybe Romain Pop got third. But even on their website, they don't have their results up, and there's really not a lot of footage, so I don't want to speculate too much. So I am going to go ahead and leave it there. Let me know down in the comments below what your predictions are for this weekend. Who do you think is going to be on the podium? Obviously, we probably all have Hayden and Jet getting the wins, but let me know what you have for your overall podium as well. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next video.